Good evening, everyone. I want to call this chilly November 16th Sammamish Planning Commission meeting to order. We will start out with roll call. Syed Safavian.
Here.
John Bachman. Here. Carrie Bosworth.
Here.
Mike Bresco.
Here.
Mark Bachman. Yeah, I guess I'm here. Sudharani Sankara.
Here.
Ajay Chakrapani.
Here.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Let's do approval of the agenda. Anybody have any comments about tonight's agenda? And on the agenda tonight is the pro plan discussion. Okay, let's call the agenda approved by common consent. Next, let's do the approval of the minutes from our November 2nd.
So
Any
moved.
changes? Anybody have any changes or corrections? Okay, we'll call the minutes from November 2nd approved. Next, did I miss the public?
I think we missed putting accessibility.
Yeah, I think I missed it and it wasn't on the list either. So let's read that. Let's go ahead and read the statement right now, if you would, Julian. Thanks.
The public is welcome to attend Planning Commission meetings in person at City Hall, 801 228th Avenue Southeast, or virtually through Zoom. In accordance with the latest public health guidance, masks are recommended but not required for in-person attendance. Public comments. Each speaker is allowed up to 3 minutes for non-agenda comment, 5 minutes if representing an organization, and 7 minutes for agenda public comment. For those providing comment through Zoom, once you have dialed into the meeting, please virtually raise your hand to indicate you would like to provide public comment. Your mic will remain muted until you are called on during the public comment period. To give public comment via Zoom, join the webinar via the link https://us06web.zom.us/j/828-226-487-94. To get public comment via mobile or landline telephone, dial the following number, US +1 253-215-8782, webinar ID 828-226-487-94#.
Great, thanks, Julian. So next we'll do non-agenda public comment. And remember that the agenda topic for this evening is the pros plan. So if you have comments on something other than that, now's the time. 3 minutes per person. Anybody in the room? Anybody online?
And we have one hand raised. Mr. Stickney, I will promote you to panelist.
Good evening, planning commissioners. Paul Stickney here. I've missed seeing Mary over the last couple of weeks. Have got a few comments to tie together. On Tuesday, I sent a comment into the city council. I didn't speak to it, and I CC'd the planning commission on it. A couple of important things in my opinion on that. The city legislative priorities should amend and add that the city supports condominium legislation that fairly balances consumer protection and fairness to defect remediation. The last 10 years, condominiums have been a hard proposition to get insurance for, and they're, when done right and if done fairly, treat consumers well, treat the people who take the risk at building them well, then they're a great way to help get ownership in the missing middle price ranges. The city also is working on a sustainability task force, and they did a very good job on the natural environment aspects of that agenda bill last Tuesday, besides the climate action plan, emissions and vehicle miles traveled. They incorporated many elements from the parts of the comp plan and urban forestry, but the sustainability focus for having within a community for our own needs over time, over lifetimes, and for future generations was missing was an emphasis on Goldilocks mix of housing that serves the needs of local residents now and future generations. And I suggest adding that to both the climate action plan and the sustainability task force. A couple significant topics coming up on Tuesday at the City Council meeting. One, I'm going to read what the city has written here: to amend Town Center Sub-Area Plan for enhanced diversity and affordability, doing a supplemental EIS, and also the City of Sammamish sustainability plan. I should go to the city website and look up that plan and take a look at the public comments on the July 27th meeting and 10th meeting. And there's a set of comments there on how to do all that and add value across the board. Take a look. All right, appreciate it.
Anybody else?
And we have no more hands raised.
All right. I'll say thanks, Paul, if you're watching and your internet is a little choppy, so you might want to move around and see if you can get a better signal if you're going to comment later. All right. Let's move on to our main topic for this evening, which is a discussion about the Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Plan. I know we're going to have a presentation. Maybe I'll just take 1 second and frame it up for the commission as a reminder. Yeah, we saw this in a very early preview once before. This is progression into a more developed plan, and just keep in mind that we're going to be we're going to have to do a public hearing and asked to make a recommendation on December 7th. And I'm sure they'll cover that Steve will probably cover that in the presentation, but just as a reminder, that's what we're doing this evening. Okay, so is there somebody making a preamble, or are we jumping right to Steve?
I'm going to make the preamble.
Okay.
So. Thank you. Good evening, Chair Boffman, Vice Chair Bresco, members of the Planning Commission. I'm Anjali Maya, Director of Parks, Recreation and Facilities. Thank you for having us tonight and giving us the opportunity to present the draft 2024 Parks, Recreation and Open Space Plan to you. I'll start by introducing the rest of the team. With me tonight is Kevin Teague, the Deputy Director of our department. And online we have Shelby Perrault, Parks Project Manager, Janie Walzer, our Management Analyst, and our consultant, Steve Du, of Conservation Techniques. It's taken several others behind the scenes as well to bring you what you have in front of you today. So what you are going to hear about tonight is just a summary of what the whole draft has. The packet has the actual document for your review. And our Parks and Recreation Commission has had a similar presentation earlier this month and is supportive of how this is taking shape. And we will also be in front of City Council next week with a similar presentation. So with that introduction, I will hand it off to Steve Du.
Thank you. Good evening, commissioners. Again, Steve Du, Conservation Techniques. As Anjali noted, we've got a brief presentation to walk you through some highlights of both the process and some recommendations for the new PROS plan, Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Plan. Primarily, the intent tonight is to give you that overview and allow for time for question and answers and comments from the commission so we can finalize this draft into a more final draft by the next couple of weeks. So again, for this evening, we'll touch on the process. Again, high-level review of the goals. Some of this you have seen in a prior presentation in September with the joint session with the Parks and Recreation Commission. So we'll move through that kind of quickly just to provide a refresher. Then leave some time to dive a little bit deeper into the key project recommendations, touch on some next steps, and again, allow for questions and answers. As a reminder, the Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Plan, the PROS plan for short, is the city's 6-year strategic plan. It is the guide for the Parks, Recreation, and Facilities Department for all things parks and recreation relating to trails and recreation opportunities in Sammamish. It is a policy document and, again, a strategic tool for the department to make enhancements and improvements to the system over time. It also serves as a capital planning tool in that it includes a capital improvement plan, set of project ideas that will become the basis for future discussions with City Council and for budgeting to make those projects become reality. Last, it's a communications tool to help tell the story of where Sammamish is today, what the community feels about parks, open space, trails, and other offerings, and set the tone for enhancements over the next 6+ years. As also a reminder, the plan is a 6-year plan, in part because the Recreation and Conservation Office, the RCO, has a requirement that jurisdictions looking to pursue grant funding have an updated plan on a 6-year cycle. In terms of community engagement, again, we've had a very robust and diverse engagement process with this plan, including a community survey that was conducted in 4 languages. It was also a mail out and an online survey. There were several opportunities for interacting with the public where they are and tabling events through community events during the course of the year. We also did 2 open house meetings, one virtual and one in person. And we did several group-based stakeholder discussions that were topic-oriented. And throughout the course of the plan process, we maintained communications through the city's media outlets, social media, website, and other media, and also stayed in close contact with the Park and Recreation Commission over several sessions throughout the course of the last 10 months. In all, we've heard from over 300 participants in the process, and that feedback really helped provide a strong grounding for where the community is today in terms of priorities and preferences. Since we covered some of that material in a prior session in September, I just want to offer a reminder on some of the core themes and takeaways that we heard from the community. And this is a synthesis of everything we heard from the community through those different outreach methods, as well as what we saw on the ground from our site assessments and conversations with staff and city leadership. One core theme is to basically take care of what you have. Renovate and upgrade existing parks, making sure that they're in good functioning manner and are well cared for. Improve ADA compliance, removing barriers, and that could take the form of modifying or adding ramps into playgrounds, or making sure that pavement is smooth and stable, and that benches and tables are accessible with a stable route across several elements of a park. So not every element needs to have ADA compliance, but more needs ADA compliance than what's currently provided. Additionally, in the realm of taking care of what you have, maintaining and preserving the natural open spaces. The city has 3 large preserves that are a wonderful asset for urban canopy, wildlife, and just quiet respite for people passing through, and strong interest in maintaining those in a high quality natural setting. Also, another theme, continue to build out the system. We heard a lot of feedback and a lot of excitement about the recent master plan efforts for Beaton Hill, for Big Rock South, and for other projects. And there's a strong desire from the community to see those projects move forward and have those prior purchase sites become newly developed sites. With that, we also heard a lot about trails, trail connectivity, and accommodating walking and biking between parks and across the community. Additionally, looking for opportunities to potentially expand access to water, particularly Lake Sammamish, as well as building out additional conveniences for the user. The city's moved forward with a signage program for wayfinding. That's in a phase 1, and continuing that into subsequent phases to add additional information and wayfinding into the system will be a big benefit. Lastly, another big theme is expanding recreation options. And for that, it's about accommodating the wider variety of interests that are out there relative to what's currently provided on the ground in existing parks. Some of that expanded opportunity will come through the development of projects like Beaton Hill or Big Rock South, and would include things like pickleball or community gardens, additional off-leash areas, etc. In addition, making sure that new playgrounds are improved and potentially include all inclusive play opportunities so everyone of all abilities has a chance to recreate. As part of the PROS plan, we also conducted a series of different system analyses that looked at the overall system of parks and open spaces and how they're functioning in terms of access and distribution. And for this simple map on the screen is one example of a series of maps that show up in the PROS plan that highlights distribution and park access as a way to think about gaps that exist. The gaps could take the form of distribution. How far does someone need to travel to access a park or an open space or a trail? But those gaps also can take the form of physical accessibility, like ADA access, and also making sure that the city provides a diverse suite of recreation opportunities across multiple sites, so that things aren't necessarily concentrated. Just to explain the map real briefly, the way these maps are designed, and it's described in the PROS plan, is that for, let's say, neighborhood and community parks, we put pins on a map, much like you do for your phone to say, how do I get from point A to point B? And for each pin, it represents a legitimate access point. It's not the park boundary. It is an entry to the park that's a legitimate entry point. So we're not identifying a full perimeter of a property that has houses or other tax lots butting up to it. It's more refined than that. And then from each of those pinpoints or pins, we say travel a quarter mile, half mile, mile, etc., and then aggregate all of that data into this color-coded map that in this case shows in the lighter pink, half-mile travel shed to a city park. And then we also did similar work to identify and acknowledge the homeowner association parks, and those show up on this map as kind of that purplish hue. So just from the map, you can see areas in white are those areas that are outside of a half-mile distribution of access to a park or a HOA site. So again, just a reference point, just so you can understand what was in the plan document. Additionally, we looked at levels of service through several different filters. We looked at National Recreation and Park Association, NRPA, statistics. We looked at the feedback from the community survey. We looked at feedback from our analysis of park sites, the gap maps, and aggregated it into a fairly clean matrix of grading system that is topic oriented and gives a sense of where the city's doing quite well and where additional attention might be needed going forward. Real simple, darker the green, the better. Into the red zones, you're looking into poor or limited opportunities. So overall, just a quick scan of this graphic. Strong sense of importance for parks and recreation opportunities by the community through the survey. Strong ratings on the conditions assessment for the parks. And distribution to parks and trails is also quite good. And visitation also is quite good. So in many ways, the city is moving forward in a great direction. There are some opportunities to fill some gaps going forward, which we note in the plan, and that will improve some of these scores in the future. Regarding where this plan is relative to the 2018 PROS plan, 2018 PROS plan focused very heavily on acquisition as a major thrust of the plan, in part to fill some of those gaps that were identified in that previous plan. Also, the previous plan had a strong focus on sport fields as well as communications and wayfinding. For the new plan, the 2024 draft plan, it really is about maintaining the existing amenities as well as upgrading and developing the existing parks, some of which were those sites that were purchased after the adoption of the prior plan. And then continuing to expand recreation options, as I noted earlier. So in terms of compiling the information for the plan, the needs assessment from the community really relied heavily on what we heard through the engagement process, what we saw from our site assessments, and the analyses that we produced. That translated into a review and refresh of the goals that were from the 2018 plan, as well as a review of the comprehensive plan goals in the effort to think through any adjustments that were needed, any additions that were needed, and under the need to look at redefining the new set of priorities and capital projects that will be part of the new draft. So in terms of the plan structure, it follows very closely to what was provided in the 2018 plan, and it also follows guidance that's provided by the Recreation and Conservation Office. So early chapters are the context, the process, and the inventory. So community profile, community engagement, and classifications and inventory. The middle section is about the needs assessment, what we heard, what we saw, how it works together, where are the gaps, and what might be recommendations. Those need assessments are broken out thematically by topic: parks and open space, trails, recreation and events, and operations. For each of those 4 chapters, we again looked at community feedback, but we also included relevant trends that are either regional, national, or state, and also looked to identify potential improvements within each of those topic areas. Goals and recommendations are very clear as to what those are, the goals and the recommendations. And Chapter 10, the projects and implementation, it highlights the capital improvement plan project list, as well as a series of strategies for potential implementation of the project list. Those strategies are not prescriptive, but they are options that the city could pursue in conversation between the Park and Recreation Commission, staff, and City Council. As for the goals, we reviewed this also in September, so I'll go through this fairly quickly. The goals, again, are thematic and align tightly to the 2018 plan with some additions. Goal 1 about engagement really is about ensuring there's active and ongoing participation from the community. Goal 2, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. That is a new goal for this plan process. And it really is about ensuring or pursuing options to engage all members of the community. So everyone has a voice, everyone has access to play and recreation. Goals 3 and 4 are about parks and open space, ensuring diversified and connected network of parks, as well as providing for a variety of different types of recreation opportunities, and making sure that things are of high quality and well cared for. Maintenance and sustainability is really about the preservation of the city's assets, making sure that they're safe, they're functional, and they're usable. Trails is about connectivity and linking parks to parks and neighborhoods and other public amenities across the city. Goal 7, climate resiliency, also new to this plan, looking to identify some options or actions for improving sustainability and other practices related to climate change and making sure that the city is doing its part on the parks and open space side as it is across other elements of city planning. Recreation facilities and activities is about the city's effort to support partnerships to provide recreation offerings. The city is not a direct provider. It does do a lot on the event side, but it does partner with other organizations to offer amenities and offer services. And then the last two goals, 9 and 10, are about funding and operations, making sure that there's financing and partnerships to help facilitate the implementation of projects, as well as internal leadership and management of the overall system. So with that, I'm going to turn attention to key projects, and this is a transition to the capital improvement plan element. So in Chapter 10, there's a list of specific project recommendations that are broken out. That capital improvement plan is, again, a funding and planning tool. It's a 6-year tool for staff to have conversations with the Parks and Recreation Commission and City Council about the types of projects to move forward into future budgeting. So the CIP itself is not a city budget, but it is a tool to guide budget discussions. And it will guide what acquisitions and what park development projects move forward. The project list includes high-level or planning-level cost estimates and proposed timelines or timeframes for specific projects, again, to help guide discussions on future budgeting. And it does also carry forward any unfinished projects from. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Shelby to walk you through some of the details.
Thank you, Steve. So like Steve mentioned, Chapter 10 of the PROS plan, or the Projects and Implementation chapter, identifies key project recommendations that are a result of the core themes we heard during the community engagement process. These 5 key recommendations you see on the screen act as a guide for identifying specific projects in the park CIP, and I'll highlight which projects in our CIP fulfill these recommendations on the next few slides. So starting off with trail connections, this will be fulfilled through citywide trail projects, in addition to a soft opening at Beaton Hill Park for trail use, a trail connection to Beaton Hill Park from the Lower Commons, as well as miscellaneous trail projects within Town Center. Next is park development and enhancements. These will be fulfilled through development of Big Rock Park South and Beaton Hill Park, as well as enhancement of Klahani Park, Inglewood Middle School, and East Sammamish Park. And then ADA and access enhancements. This will be achieved through the capital repair and replacement program, in addition to our parks barrier removal. Acquisition to fill park system gaps. This is realized through land acquisition, in addition to completing master plans at parcels that have previously been acquired through our land acquisition program, to ensure that these new parcels are bridging the gap in our park system. And then the last is wayfinding and signage. This is completed through citywide wayfinding program, like you see on the image on the right of the screen, as well as at specific parks during each of our individual capital improvement projects. So I highlighted a handful of projects on the previous slides, but taking a step back to look at the bigger picture of our capital projects, this pie chart that you see on the screen summarizes the overall capital expenditures by project category over the next 6 years. As you can see, there's approximately $43 million allocated to CIP projects, and this dollar amount has been spread across renovations, park development, acquisition, planning, and trails. And this 6-year CIP also meets the GMA's probable funding threshold based on our projected or anticipated project revenues. Next. There are a number of revenue sources that fund improvement projects in the park CIP. So first is park impact fees. These are one-time charges against a new development project to help pay for new or expanded public facilities that will address the increased demand that's created by that development. They are generally used for capital costs, such as acquisition, park development, and development of open space or recreational facilities. They cannot be used for operating or maintenance costs. And then the second, but probably the greatest majority of our revenue is real estate excise tax, or REIT. So the city receives a total of 0.5% on all sales of real estate. 1/2 of this, or 1/4 of 1%, is allocated to parks. And these funds can be used for any capital improvement project, as well as for property acquisition. And then the third on this screen is King County levy funding. This is a 6-year property tax levy. So a portion of the King County Parks levy provides funding for local jurisdictions to support park capital projects. And this levy extends through 2025. And then the fourth is investment interest. So a small amount of interest is earned on our Parks Capital Improvement Fund. Next is the operating contribution. General funds could be transferred from the general fund to the Parks CIP as designated in the biennial budget. And then 6th is grants. So we have been successful in the past in obtaining county grants, but grant funding is not always reliable. So we don't presume a significant amount of grant revenue in our Parks CIP. And then last is the King County Transfer of Development Rights, or TDR program. This is another source of revenue for the Park CIP, as and when development rights from a landowner are sold to a developer to increase density on their project property. And I will hand it back to Anjali for next steps.
Thank you, Shelby. So as we discussed, we will be taking this to council next week. We are asking for any comments you have on this draft plan no later than the 28th of November. So that's close to 2 weeks from today. And then we will be back in front of you on December 7th for a public hearing and recommendation to adopt this plan to council. And we anticipate the final adoption of the PROS plan in January after the second hearing with City Council. And the 2024 PROS plan will be added to the 2024 comprehensive plan when it is adopted as volume 2 of the Parks chapter. With that, we'll turn it back to you, Chair Boffman, for questions.
Thank you. Okay. Who has questions or comments? This is a very short document, so I'm sure that probably nobody has anything. Ajay, go ahead. You're first up.
Thank you. That was a great presentation. I have one question that came up in my head as I was working through it. I was going to ask you, do you have an idea of what percentage is taken from the core themes for each one of those 3 core themes? Then in your presentation, I saw slide number 24, which you had broken the $43 million into the different ones. Am I supposed to see that as they are, because they're not directly related, but I could quickly align to that? So could you provide some guidance on how they align with the core themes? Because if the first bucket takes a lot of money, which is maintain things, what are we doing for the rest of them? That's the first question that comes up. The second question was another point that you had mentioned there, which was to look for climate change and work towards that. And where does that fall into this whole approach? Were my questions for it. So sorry if you want me to repeat any part of it, I'll do that, but that's the thing.
Sure. And I'll take a stab at it first, and then, of course, if the team would like to add to it. And that's a good question. And they don't directly relate, dollars don't relate to where the priorities are. And the reasons are that when you look at park development, that's really expensive. Like we are currently, we just adopted a master plan for Big Rock South, and that's several million. Whereas trail connections are really important, and we're hearing more and more from the community that they'd like that. But in $500,000, you can get a lot done. It takes a lot of staff effort, and it takes a lot of, sometimes we are looking for easements, and so there's, we have to get the real estate agents involved. So there's a lot of effort, but it's not a lot of dollars. So the pie chart won't give you, it won't directly correlate to, what those themes were. And the other question you had was on maintenance as opposed to new. We do have a balance of that, but I think the main point there was 6 years ago when we did this, there was a lot of concern, like we don't have enough. Your highest priority needs to be to go and acquire more land. And now we are hearing more from the survey results, and it may be an impact of the pandemic, it may be so many different things that, let's first focus on maintaining what we have and improving what we have. So one example is the East Sammamish Park project, where the ball fields will be improved. So that's an existing park. You're not going to get something new, but you're going to get an improvement. So those were two questions. I think there's one more question I might not.
Yes. The third question was, how does this, is there some kind of a correlation that I can take towards climate change or all other aspects to it? Is that, and where does that fall? It could fall in one of the core areas, like you mentioned, and indirectly to those 7 or 8 areas, but can you give some guidance on that?
And yes, so we are already doing things that are, good for climate resiliency in our current operations, whether it's small changes like adding biodegradable PET waste bags in our parks, or whether it's trying to use more electric blowers rather than gas blowers, recycled material. So we are doing that. We are going to be a little more deliberate in everything we do, be it our maintenance. When we look at new projects, we'll keep that in mind to reduce, reuse, recycle. Like, sometimes we do have to cut a tree on a site, and we can reuse the tree within the site rather than, use the materials on the site. Extend it to events. We're trying to do less of, the cheap plastic toys that you give a kid to take away, and trying to be a little more sustainable. So it will extend beyond operations, capital projects, and our recreation and events. So that's, again, something that should permeate the work we do. And we will have to start being a little more deliberate about trying to track that. I will look to the team. Steve, did you want to add to that?
Thanks, Anjali. I guess 2 other points would be with regard to managing open space, and that is the benefits provided by urban tree canopy, and ensuring the health and good care of the existing trees that are throughout the city's preserves. The other is, again, with regard to trails, having a more connected and more extensive trail network hopefully would accommodate more people to be out of a vehicle and on the trails. So the discussion about climate resiliency and climate change takes a number of different facets, as Anjali mentioned. I just wanted to highlight those 2.
Great. I have only one suggestion on top of this. These are great points that you're working on, great ideas that you're working on. It'll also be very nice if you could find a way that we can pass this on in some form of communication, direct or indirect, to the citizens of Sammamish, to the residents of Sammamish, to be able to understand what they're doing, what you're doing, so that if there are ideas that we can pick in our daily lives out of the work that you're doing, out of the lessons that you're doing, for example, the bags, the refuse bags and other things that you talked about, that'll be something fantastic that the city can, that people in the city can use as well. So look forward to doing that in your thing. I'm done with my time. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Judy?
I have a simpler question than Ajay's. So, in your 2018 plan, you have a goal of like to increase the number of parks, right? So, how many new parks we have added?
From 2018 to now, we opened Big Rock Central, which is the park that has the treehouse and the historic structure. So that is a park that we have opened. But then we have added a good number of parcels, a total of about 75 acres of land. And that includes Big Rock South, which is the parcel on which Mary Piggott lived, and she donated that to the city. And then you saw two of the parcels that are identified for master plans. They have names of the previous owners, so we call them the Parker property and the Yates property. And then the Beaton Hill parcels were also purchased in the last 6 years. Shelby, did I cover all the parcels? I did. Okay.
Thank you.
Mike?
Yeah. Well, first off, amazing amount of work, and it's great. And if I were to make comments on all of the awesome things in it, we would be here all night. So we'll focus on some of the things where I think there could be some perhaps considerations for improvement. But the first is a question. Early on, it talked about the Metropolitan Parks District as a funding mechanism. And in the goals around funding, that wasn't listed specifically, and that's maybe something to consider putting that in. But what is the question is, what's the Metropolitan Parks District, and how would that work as a funding mechanism?
Sure. So I will let Steve speak to the Metropolitan Parks District, and then I can share a status of where we might be at in considering that at the city. Steve?
Thanks, Anjali. Yeah, so the idea of a Metropolitan Park District is referenced in the plan in the implementations chapter. It's more loosely suggested in the goals section under other funding tools. And it is in more detail described in the appendix about implementation tools and tactics. But in summary, a Metropolitan Park District is simply a junior taxing district, much like a fire district or some other smaller jurisdictional tax district that would be established by the vote of the people. And they would say, we hereby authorize the creation of this district. With that comes the authority to apply a property tax up to 75 cents per thousand. And that then is an amount that would be discussed with the city leadership prior to the formation, but also if a district is formed, it would be governed by a district board, which could be a separate elected board, or it could be city council serving a role as the board over the Metropolitan Park District. So in a sense, this junior taxing district would potentially be established to help finance operations, park improvements, park capital. It is similar to a general fund in terms of the types of uses those dollars could be put toward. But it does, as a junior taxing district, have limitations based on the total aggregate amount of tax authority that the city has. So there's a lot of detail, but there are state rules that say any one area can only tax so much. And if you come close to that threshold, other things get chipped away. And as a junior taxing district that's low on the pecking order, it's also one that would get chipped away earlier. So the notion of funding capacity needs to be looked at relative to the types of improvements or operational costs you'd like to cover through a metropolitan park district. So in short, it's a tool that could be put forward to the voters, and if approved, could help finance improvements down the road.
You're going to touch on status, Anjali?
Yes, and so there was a fiscal sustainability task force that actually worked on this more recently, and they came up with the recommendation of, and there is a tool that looks at the city's projected expenses and revenues, and there were two things identified to add to the revenues, and one was a utility tax and the other one was this Metropolitan Parks District, and they were staggered. And I believe the council packets are now published for next week, when this fiscal sustainability implementation plan that is being recommended to council will be presented. And I believe the update is that we do not anticipate the need for this Metropolitan Parks District for operations for the next 10 years. And I think that fiscal sustainability plan is projected for the next 10 years. So that's what we know right now, and more to follow at the council meeting next week.
Which is why it didn't show up in that list of funding sources then, I guess.
Right.
Hey, a couple of then comments. On goal number 3, and this is in the body, this isn't in the, sort of the action plan list. When I read that, most of the, I guess, actions under that, like 3.1, so forth, had sort of words like acquisition and so forth, so it read mostly like acquiring connecting trails or property or corridors, things like that. There was one on wayfinding, which felt like it didn't quite fit, for what that's worth. And just as a maybe food for thought, goal number 3 sounds like it's fairly high up in importance, and yet we're not focused on acquisition. And so the acquisition capital costs like 10% of the total projected budget over 6 years. Maybe goal number 3 should be moved down to 7 or 8 or something like that, just in terms of packaging and reinforcing the importance of maintenance versus acquisition. And I may have read some of that wrong or read too much into that, so take that for what it's worth. Goal 6 talks about trails and connectivity, which is great and showed up in the themes and really important in terms of feedback. And what I think was missing in that for me is something that would be the more big, hairy, audacious kind of goal, like the Emerald Necklace, or really connecting parks in a way that could be like a loop that would encourage, really more hiking through. And one maybe out of the box idea, I used to live in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh did not have like, a belt highway around. And so what the planners did was they designated little county roads as orange belts and green belts. And there, it was crazy, because if you came from a place that had like a great beltway, you laughed. But it did help to provide some connection, and people, oh, I'm just off the orange belt. So a way to maybe provide some connectivity or help people see connectivity is to not just say, oh, here's a trail, but this trail is part of a sequence of trails and roadways or sidewalks that kind of connect together in a way that's logical. And it could almost replicate a little bit of like that Emerald Necklace, or when we played around, during that Saturday session, the bracelet, or, that would not be quite as expensive as really truly completing that whole, system, but would make it possible for people to kind of say, oh, like I'm just connecting these together. And it might include some sidewalks, right? So food for thought on that. In goal 7, it talks about resiliency and climate change. I think it would be nice, so we don't forget, that it's not just the native trees and plantings and all that, they've got to be native to what's happening with, hotter summers and, droughts. A native tree is the red cedar, and they're dying because they're not getting what they need to or what they used to. And let's see. Oh, this was one of the questions. You talk about Evans Preserve, which, if I understand my boundaries of Sammamish, is not actually Sammamish. It's King County. The plan doesn't talk about Soaring Eagle or Duthie Hill, which are adjacent just the way Evans Creek Preserve is. And I think there's some benefit to looking a little bit more holistically. I know for myself personally, I spend more time in Evans Creek and Soaring Eagle than I do, like at Big Rock. And I actually view those as part of, the Sammamish. It's part of why it's really great to live in Sammamish. So I know there was some talk about coordinating with King County and other municipalities. It might help to have those slightly more integrated into the plan, or, recognizing if you include Evans Creek in, then include Soaring Eagle and Duthie Hill. So those are my comments.
Thank you. Great comments. And I think you did mention coordination with the county, because the difference is that the city acquired, developed and improved and maintains Evans Creek Preserve, but we don't, you're aware that we don't have that same level of involvement with.
But there's still the ability to coordinate.
Sure.
And even in terms of promoting what we all think is the park system around Sammamish, rather than saying there's a boundary and it's theirs and we're not thinking about it, it
Right.
really is part of the system that we all can enjoy. So
That
food
is
for
true.
thought.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Carrie?
Thank you. All right. I do want to take a few moments to highlight some of the things that I really enjoyed about the document. The facts and figures were really great, just understanding the acres and the number of parks, as well as, the HOA and the private parks as well, is really helpful to understanding overall how much green space we have in the city, which is quite a lot. I also appreciated the maps were great, especially the trail one too, to talking about connectivity. It was looking like we were getting there, so that was really good to see. And as well as, I just wanted to commend you on all the open houses. I went to a lot of them, and they were fantastic, so thank you. And then I loved how the comments were dispersed in the document. It helped remind the reader what this is for, or who this is for. So reading those comments as you're reading the text was really helpful. And so two comments. Definitely the connectivity, and to Commissioner Bresco's point, how do we elevate having sidewalks be also a big part of that connectivity? And is there funding for that in this plan? Is that implied? And how does that work with any funding that's in, say, other parts of the city's budget? How do those two play together?
Yeah, that is a great question. In fact, just earlier today, we met with our Public Works team, and they are working on the transportation element of the comprehensive plan. And so we are going to be working closely with them. So they have access to this document as well. And what we've committed to doing is they have a certain amount of budget for sidewalks, and we can't extend our budget into the public right of way, but what we can do is look at where we already have some trails built and where we have these missing links, and look at if there's any low-hanging fruit, and if we can kind of prioritize in that order to make some of these connections happen. The east-west connections were identified as a priority, and they're hard to do because the grades drop off significantly in the plateau. But the way we would accomplish that is basically by partnering with our Public Works team.
Great, yeah. 'Cause, when I first moved here, I just want to point out, I lived in East Lake in Seattle, and I remember, being excited about walking down to the trail at the lake, and then as I was going around the trail, it turned into a park, and then it turned into a parking lot, and it had a lot of wayfinding signs, and it encouraged me to keep going, but I'm like, where am I going? And you're just going through all these different places, but ultimately it was a trail. Other question I have is, I definitely, from this and other presentations, there's feedback on how folks use parks these days. Is there anything, do we know usage of parks throughout the year? Is that any facts and figures that we have, or are we able to collect that?
So we don't have an actual study and actual numbers. We obviously know that our parks are well used, and then it's also based on the amenities. So where you have sports fields, it's based on the season that sports are played. In the summer, all 3 waterfront parks, we are constantly talking to a public works team, our police, to just make sure that the parks remain safe and don't end up with all the traffic issues. We are more recently looking at doing some counters for our trails, and trying to just get a sense on what connections should we prioritize and which trails are being used more than others. But that's about what we've done. There are, ways to try and have a counter at a park. It's a little difficult because we have so many entries to our parks. So in the past, we have had interns spend a few hours and try and get a sample size, but not right now. We don't have any current facts and figures.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
John, go ahead.
So my comments would be more editorial than suggestions. I can't emphasize this more, but hats off to Director Meyer, staff, Steve. Sammamish Parks and Recreation has taken a different path, somewhat created a new trail. Traditional Parks and Recreation is really led by recreation, scheduled activities, ball fields, classes. This plan lays out sort of the opposite direction, the direction that more people use than going to an arts class, for example. Highest priorities around maintenance, including capital maintenance of maintaining a high standard for our parks, and focusing on open space and connectivity. Director's comments about working with Public Works is shorthand for stealing some CIP money from Public Works. Great work. And comments about adding the connections to our regional assets in your trail maps, and even things like light rail and how people get around. So it sort of leads you down the path towards how well this plan integrates with the other elements of the comp plan around transportation, climate, even economic and land use. So it's 200 pages, a lot to digest, but the themes that are emerging around listening carefully to the community about trails and open space. And not said in here, but just want to acknowledge it, is the city's and the department's efforts, rather than to go out and purchase a lot of land for ball fields, partnering with the YMCA and the school districts to make the best and highest use of those capital assets. So yeah, those investments are a big piece of the CIP pie, but how much bigger they would be if we had to go purchase the land, build the ball fields, put in parking, maintain all of that stuff, rather than partnering with the school districts and using existing facilities and investing in them for higher use and lower maintenance with the artificial fields. So those are some things that aren't even covered really in the plan, but are really key fundamental themes in how and where the department's going. I mentioned ties to the other. Getting back to Jay's and Carrie's comments about climate and utilization, also not stated in here is the focus on open space is critical in our climate action plan, because what better way to address climate than to have open space? So utilization goes far beyond anybody even putting foot on a trail in an open space. The fact that it's there and exists in our community is of huge benefit. Even if you're driving by and it soothes you down a little bit from that hectic day at work, that's a benefit. So I just want to emphasize this de-emphasis of traditional parks and recreation is a huge step, I think, and very wise given our limited assets and income, but still providing the greatest benefit to our community. So thank you for that. Just a couple of more tactical things. An executive summary would really help, whether it's 2, 3, or 4 or 5 pages, and with the goals summarized right up front, to give the reader a quick look at what's ahead. Because not everybody's going to pick up a 200-page document and read the whole thing, and the goals don't even show up until page 91. So some sort of quick and dirty executive summary, I think, would be appreciated. I think that's all I've got.
Thank
Ed,
you.
go ahead.
First of all, I wanted to express my appreciation for the work that the consultant and the staff they have done. That's a great document with a lot of good information, a lot of data to look at. I have a number of questions. Question number 1. Am I correct to assume that the entire Park and Rec CIP is $43 million, right? Is that for the entire CIP?
That's right, yes.
Okay. Out of that, I guess that my question, do we know either percentage-wise or the figure-wise how much of that $43 million is actually funded? This is a wish list, very similar to the TIP, Transportation Improvement Program. So any idea that how much is that funded, either percentage-wise or the amount?
What we've shown you there is what is funded. What is unfunded is the last column. Do you have the number handy? Yeah. So, but the 43 million that is there, the 6-year total is funded. It is, so there is the last bit on page 2 of the CIP has the revenues. So it shows you a beginning fund balance and then the amount of revenue anticipated in the next 6 years from real estate excise tax, park impact fee, the King County levy, and it adds that up. So I believe it shows we have a few 100,000 left at the end of 6 years if every project was completed on that list.
And speaking of potential funding sources,
Yeah.
The presentation that was made reference to the impact fee, REIT, real estate excise tax, and then TDR, 25% from the county. Can you go over that 25% of the county? This has to do with the development activities that the King County approved prior to the incorporation of a city, or what is that?
This is a program that is developed and managed by our partners in community development, and it is a mechanism to make sure that development there are certain areas identified in the city, and I won't claim to be an expert on it, but that the development potential could be transferred to the town center. Basically, the goal was to allow more development in the town center. So I don't want to put you on the spot, but did you want to add to that, Evan?
Well, I'm familiar with the TDR. The question was not TDR. The question is that 25%
Yes.
that the city collects from the county,
Yes.
is that the fund from the previous development project that the county approved?
I think that would be funds that are coming from the diversion of development in those areas, those sending sites that are protected by the TDRs. So I believe we need David Pyle here for a thorough answer here, but I believe the sending sites are in the Emerald Necklace, and so the 25% comes from development that isn't occurring there and is being transferred to the town center.
Right.
And so to answer your question, it's an ongoing program.
Right. So since this is a CIP, this is a 6-year program, I'm assuming that you made certain assumptions that how much of TDR funding would be available in addition to what you get from the county that would be available as a potential additional funding source, right?
That is correct. And Shelby, in our current draft, do we have anticipated numbers, or did we leave that blank for now?
We left that blank for now.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So we've left that blank, but that is an added source of funding that we could potentially get if anyone along the Emerald Necklace, so this is in King County property, chose to exercise that option. And there are some sending sites within the city's urban growth boundary as well.
Are there any federal funding sources available, including that big pot of money that Congress approved 2 years ago for different purposes? Is there anything that city can apply and get some grants?
We haven't pursued federal grants for parks projects. We have tried for RCO, the Recreation and Conservation Office, state grants. And we have actually not been very successful with state grants. And the reason is that the state is looking more and more at equity and looking at underserved communities. And so we are trying to argue that geographic equity is also important. And so we will continue to apply for those funds. But to answer your question, I am not aware of any federal grants that the city has previously applied for, and there are none right now that we are.
Also, as a potential funding source, how about the sponsorship? You see, you go to some parks and say, okay, this was donated by Kiwanis of Washington or Chamber of Commerce and all that. Have you guys, you look into a sponsorship?
Yes. So what we have is we actually have we're really fortunate to have a donor that gave us 53 acres of property that she owned and lived on. I want to just say that you could take that as maybe a 53 million donation. And that's just at the top of my head, but it was a significant donation. So we've had things at that scale. We are also very fortunate as a community with the number of volunteers we have that work in our park. So that's another form. It's not a sponsorship per se, but there are several projects, several of our open areas that are in the condition they are today because of the work of our plant stewards, our stormwater stewards, and the list goes on. We have had the Rotary consider doing something in one of our parks. They used to do this nightmare at Beaver Lake Park for several years. And then our maintenance team would, have really long faces at the end of that because the park would be pretty beat up at the end of that whole event. And so there was a dialogue that they would like to help build something. Nothing really came out of that, but there are opportunities and we can continue to look at those.
There was some discussion early on as far as using native plants. As we know, with the global warming every year, there's a 1 or 2 degree warmer than the previous year. Have you guys, you look at, instead of focusing on the native plant, look at drought-tolerant plants? Can you comment on that, please?
Generally, so basically, native plants are, Kevin, you're probably better at answering this. I'll take a stab at it. But they are in basically good with all seasons in the year, and they usually don't need a lot of water to survive once they have established themselves. But I think, like what has been pointed out, is we are seeing a shift in the climate, and now we have to be a little more careful about the kind of plants we pick. But we have amongst us here a certified arborist. I don't know, Kevin, if you want to go to the podium and add to that.
So we are looking at both native and drought tolerant, and both, you know, categorically making sure that plants that we are planting are native in terms of their adaptation to our area, as well as drought tolerant. Some native plants are more drought tolerant than others. Some need to be planted in places that are wetter. And we've got a great habitat specialist working with a lot of our volunteers, and he's developed some plant lists that are incorporating plants that maybe previously were less common. While they're native to the Pacific Northwest, maybe not so much in the Seattle area, but with the drier climates that we're seeing, beginning to introduce and see how some of those species perform. So that's kind of a cutting edge thing that Sebastian is working on. And so we'll have more data as those plants, you know, as they survive.
I'm glad that you and your staff working with Public Works on an issue that close to my heart, and that is a physical connection. I'm glad that I hear that you're looking at the possible sidewalk, and I was the one that brought it up, that don't look at only physical within these recreation amenities, but also connection to the neighborhood. And if that happens to be requiring a safe crosswalk or some kind of pedestrian amenities, that would really help increase in utilization of those facilities. I didn't see that much about education. And let me kind of elaborate. I brought it up a long time ago about P-Patch. I don't know if that is an education or some kind of programs that actually attracts kids or maybe adults with the family that they want to go and experiment in the park. Wilburton Park in Bellevue has some of those amenities. Have you looked into that as a part of the amenity that you provide in some of the parks?
Yeah, we touched upon this briefly. So we do have a few summer camps. And one example is with a group called Nature Vision. And so they do conduct summer camps in our parks and use that as education opportunities with, you know, showing kids around just the habitats like at the lake or in more forested areas. And so we have a bit of that. And there are education opportunities throughout the year. Like our volunteer teams work a lot with students who are looking for volunteer hours, who actually come and work on removing invasive species and planting native plants. We have a bee pollinator garden at Big Rock Central. So we are doing that. Since we don't do a lot of direct programming, it may not be something you hear about a lot, but there are efforts throughout the year to educate our community and our youth.
Again, thank you very much. That is a really good document, and you have put a lot of things into it. One last thing that I had a conversation with the mayor on that too, and I brought it up to your attention, and that is really, is it important if there is any way that you can provide live broadcasts of some of these events and put it on a TV. Mayor liked that, and she said that she's going to talk to the city managers if that is something feasible. For instance, the concert at night, you have it, but if the people, they cannot, for some reason, one way or the other, they cannot attend that, if it is available on the public access TV, you can record it and then rebroadcast it. That would be really useful.
Thank you.
I'll go next. First, let me say I love our park system, and I really appreciate the. So let me say that we've lived here since before Sammamish was a city, and seeing the improvements since then, that's our point of reference. And every time we see something in one of the parks, it's a great thing for us because we realize it's because the city is here. You know, we have that comparison back to before the city was even here. And so that's always a wonderful thing. And the other thing I wanted to say was, I hear your comment about Nightmare at Beaver Lake, but I'll also say that both my kids, who are mostly grown now, have fantastic memories of Nightmare at Beaver Lake, and so do I. So, you know, there's good and bad about all of those kinds of things. Okay, I have two questions. One is probably pretty simple, and the other one, and I mentioned one of these before, but the other one is probably a little bit more involved, and it came to me as we were going through the presentation. The first one is about the mini parks. That's on, I think, page 22 of the plan, 38 of the packet, and it makes a statement that, I don't have it right here, I'd have to scroll like crazy, but it's like mini parks are not an option for the city, and I couldn't really figure out why. Can you just, or maybe somebody say, why is mini park? It seems like a enticing idea, but it's also the plan kind of says, but it's not, and never really says why. Why is that?
I'm going to turn this one over to Steve.
Thank you. Yeah, so thanks for the question about mini parks. That point is noted in Chapter 4 as part of the classifications. So in that section, we're simply defining the different types of parks that could exist in the city's overall park system, mini park being one of them. And in that section, it does reference that many parks are not feasible for the city to develop at this time. It does say in part because of their small size and the limited recreation opportunities that they provide. The other layer to it is that on a operating staff time per acre, mini parks are much more expensive to care for because they're smaller and it revolves around a lot of more drive time or windshield time to get to and maintain such small parks for limited opportunities. So the focus really is to pursue, find, and develop sites that are larger than a half acre, which is kind of the half acre to 3 acre size is the mini park category. So it's more of a practical matter given the city's operating budgets and staff loads. And if there were no other opportunities and a opportunity existed to secure a property in a spot that had a gap, I'm sure the city would pursue it. It's just not the most feasible option for the city. And it is also a carry forward in terms of this definition from the 2018 plan. And Anjali, is there anything else you would add?
No, that's good. Thank you.
I would just say let's not give up totally on that idea. And partly I say that because if we're going to start to talk about neighborhood centers or, you know, smaller scale of that sort of thing, then a small park that goes with it might be an appropriate thing. So let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater. So the other one is a more probably complicated question. It seems to me as I was listening to the presentation that there's a tension between what the analysis shows in terms of park acreage per capita and the what's it called, the travel shed analysis, which if you just looked at the sort of the science of it, let's say, you would say we need more park space and distributed more across the city. And then when you listen to the survey, people seem to have said, we want to maintain and improve our existing parks. I guess, so then you take those two things and you look at this plan, and to me it seems very clear that the plan is focused on what people asked for. And I understand why that is. However, I'm not sure, I don't want to go back, but I also feel like when the math tells us one thing, and that thing is not obvious to people when you do a survey, because people might not realize, well, we have a kind of a problem because there's half the, whatever it is, 30% of the city that's more than walking distance from a park. Their answer to your questions might be different. And I guess I'm a little concerned that the outcome feels very anti-acquisition. And I'm not sure that I'm convinced that we should ignore the evidence that we have that says that that's really not what we should be doing to be politically responsive to what people said in a survey. Again, I don't want to go back and rehash it, but I think we should keep that in mind, because if the analysis says and the maps show that we need more space, then we need more space. And whether that happens today or in the future, we should be careful not to ignore the facts just because people didn't even necessarily, for the most part, realize that that was part of the issue, because you don't know that until you see the map and listen to the discussion. The other part of that, then, first off, let me say, I think we should be a little careful, and this is 200 and some pages, so maybe I've missed it a little bit, but when you talk about people saying we should maintain our existing parks, that is an operating budget. And when we talk about building parks or building new things in the parks, that is a capital budget. And we should be cautious when we talk about budgets about allowing those two things to get blended together. We still have to come up with the money, I understand that. But those are not the same thing, and we shouldn't forget that those are coming from a different revenue stream, or I'm sorry, a different budget stream, and we need to manage that accordingly and not allow things to get, that should be an expense. I mean, when I see some of the things on this chart at the end here, the 6-year capital improvement plan, mostly they look like capital things to me, but there's a few that look sort of like maintenance things that maybe shouldn't be on the capital plan. Not a big deal, but we should be careful about that because it's an important distinction and we need to manage our budget properly. And then the last thing that's kind of related to that, when I look at this chart and I look at the 6-year plan, so after 2023, the 6 years, it says we are forecasting spending $38,600,000, and that includes a line item, in this version at least, for acquisitions that says 0. So I'm not sure I understand. The pie charts seem to include 2023 and show the $4 million that's in acquisitions in 2023, but the plan itself, the 6-year plan, it feels like they're being mixed together somehow. And I think that's confusing and also kind of misleading, because in reality, this plan is 0 acquisitions, unless there's something here that says, well, we're going to say it's 0 unless something else happens, right? Maybe I missed that. But really, we shouldn't say that we have any acquisitions planned because we have a chart that shows that we have 0. And that kind of goes back to my original comment, which was, we've listened to the feedback, and that's important, and we've built a plan around that, and we've gone so far to the other end that we're planning on not acquiring anything, that's what I get from looking at the chart. Again, maybe there's more elsewhere that I just didn't catch in the reading of it. So, sorry, that's a long comment, but it all kind of ties together, right? The balance between improving versus acquisitions, the analysis of the travel distances and the density of the parks for the people that we have, and the population is going to continue to grow a little bit, and how we manage the budget. Those things all tie together very, very much in this plan, and we should be very thoughtful and diligent about making sure that we understand what the plan says and we agree and talk about those things openly, like $0 for acquisitions, so that we recognize that's what we've decided to do. And I just appreciate, maybe as this goes forward to the council in particular, that get highlighted and there's not sort of that confusion about, well, are we buying something or not, or what are we doing? Make sure it's super clear to them so that they're making a decision based on the actual, what the plan says. And they'll probably catch this and ask the similar type questions, but just in case, I would be preemptive about explaining all that.
Yeah, I did want to thank you, because that is an excellent point, and just speak briefly to it. We will highlight this for council. And you're absolutely right, and that's a really important fact, that it's not like we don't need more land. So that piece remains, and I won't repeat everything. You put it well. And so one thing I'll just point out is for the math, we have dollars in 23 that will get rolled over to 24. So what we have is a biennial budget. So the $4 million will be available. That's not a lot for a 6-year period. So while we show 0, and I agree it's misleading, maybe we can highlight that $4 million is all we'll have, but there are, obviously members on our Parks Commission as well who have similar concerns that we don't have a whole lot on acquisition. And then to be fair to the residents and the survey, to your point, all they are telling us is the order of priority. I don't think it's necessarily saying don't go acquire more land, but it is a little more about let's try and add amenities to our existing park sites. Let's optimize or maximize what we can do with what we have before we purchase more. 6 years back, there was so much development that there was almost a panic. Like, let's go buy land, because if we don't buy it, it's going to be a subdivision and a set of homes, and maybe that concern isn't the same. But to your point, it's not like it's gone away, the need to acquire more land. And land acquisition and this gap analysis is also based on population. And if we we are continuing to grow, and as we continue to grow, we are going to continue to need to grow our park system. So I do appreciate your comments, and we will highlight that for council, and that would be their consideration to either reprioritize some of our projects, to allocate more funds towards acquisition, and that's a possibility, and or we could end up basically. We didn't want to show a negative balance. We have shown what we have shown over here is a balanced CIP, as Commissioner Syed pointed out, that how much is funded. Right now, what you see in the chart is funded.
Yeah, I guess the other thing about that would be, I see in the chart that half basically of the budget is Big Rock Park South. And if you love Big Rock Park South and live close by, that's awesome. But, there are a lot of other things too. So I guess I would hope that if an opportunity presents itself, everybody to purchase something or to acquire something, that everybody is well aware of what our plan was and what the off-ramp might be. So we find an opportunity for something that's in a perfect spot, then maybe we stretch out some of this a little bit further into the future. Doesn't happen quite as fast. We can acquire something. We create some flexibility because everybody knows exactly what our plan was and knows how we can then adjust as we go. To me, that's the most important part of it, is understanding what we were planning to do and what we can do if we need to make a change along the way. Okay, I've talked more than I should have. Sorry about that. Anybody else want to come back and add something else? John looks like he wants to.
Just kind of follow up. On page 67, highlighted in yellow are all of the HOA. These are probably mostly playgrounds. There seems to be dozens of them. I'm not even suggesting that they're the Parks Department's responsibility, but they do exist, and they are an amenity. And there are other kinds of amenities that you might want to consider highlighting, because I know that the data is available for, along East Lake Sammamish, we've got a lot of steep areas and critical areas, and those critical area maps, those are not going to be developed. Those are open, nearly permanent open space. In some cases, could be part of connectivity, trail connectivity. So having some sort of an overlay to include all of those buffer areas, a lot of the developments have to have their 20 or 25% buffer area. I realize that's really getting into the weeds, but cumulatively, that's a lot of open space. That's not directly in the park system or maintained by parks, but contributes to our open space. and the climate action plan. So just a couple thoughts.
Thank you.
Oh, Ajay's down there. Go ahead.
Yeah. I have one small question, and this may be related to you because this is related to the climate and climate resiliency and tree canopy and other things. Has there been any shift that you're either seeing or are estimating to see with the climate change to our native plants? Some of our native, what we call as Washington native, slowly, unfortunately, dying off, and others which are starting to form a base over here, which are non-invasive. Do you have any of those plants or vegetation that is coming up that you're seeing, or is that research that is still open and not done?
I would say at this point, that's still inconclusive. We've definitely seen more mortality, a higher mortality in trees that you didn't used to see from the drier summers, the particularly hot summers that we've had. And in terms of what is going to replace those, that is still unclear. I know that we've looked at some species like from Northern California that with the thought that maybe they would survive better. And this is what I was referring to earlier that our habitat specialist is working on. And we've experimented with planting some of those to see how they adapt. But it is a work in progress.
And that'll be a part of in some way would become a part of how it would inform your 6-year plan, the next 6-year plan?
Well, the 6-year plan doesn't typically get into the granular level of plant types. It would be more, unless you're speaking about the urban forestry management plan. But at the level that we're selecting specific plant material, that's it is a portion or a part of a specific project, but it's not spelled out in the PROS plan at all.
Got it. Okay.
Does that make sense?
Got it. Yep. Thanks.
Syed?
Two quick questions as far as the public outreach. You mentioned about the stakeholders. Who are they? Stakeholder groups?
Right. Janie, would you like to cover the stakeholders that we met with?
Yeah, of course. So we had 3 different stakeholder discussions, and they were categorized into 3 groups. So we had a DEIB discussion group where we invited community partners from diverse backgrounds. So Open Doors for Multicultural Families had a representative come, Crosspath Counseling, someone from the Sammamish Little Chinese School. So that's like one example of the first. The second was an athletics discussion group, and here we invited people who run athletic facilities for both little leagues and adult sports come, so like coaches and people who run those leagues and rent our fields and use those. Also, someone who played cricket was invited, so diverse sports users. And then the third one was environmental focus group, where we invited some of our stewards, people who volunteer in our parks, people who use our pea patches or our community garden, some of our trail stewards. So those were the 3 discussion groups, and those were the focus for each one.
Second question has to do with I saw a reference to the synthetic turfs. As you probably have heard, the state of California put in strong restrictions on using of synthetic turfs. What is your department's position as far as use of synthetic turfs?
Synthetic turf is actually, speaking of climate resiliency, is climate resilient because it doesn't use, and it's also environmentally better because you don't use all the products that you need to use on natural grass. Currently folks are still using a lot of the gas blowers. You don't use that, and you use a lot less water. So
Well, that's the positive side. Let's look at the negative side. Increase in temperature,
there is a
environmental concerns.
there is an increase in temperature in the Pacific Northwest. That is, summers are getting warmer, but it's not as much, in the calendar year as you see in other states. And the infill, the rubber infill, there have been no conclusive studies that is actually harmful to health, but there are more natural products like cork infill that we have started specifying. So for our most recent turf replacement at Eastlake High School, we used a natural cork infill, and that is the same product that is being proposed for the Inglewood Middle School. And I will look to Kevin if you want to add anything else. Did I cover it? Okay.
Thank you.
I would just add, I think that the conversation about that was as much about people putting turf on their lawns at their house, and then when they dispose of it later, it's a huge disposal issue for, landfill and all those things. I would say when I read that exact story, I thought, well, but if it's a park where it's a common use for many, many people, that might be worth it then, because it gets a lot of use from a lot of people. If all you're doing is putting it in your front lawn, and I have friends who've done that, just so that you don't have to mow the grass, that might be a different calculus that you do. But I think the disposal issue is probably as much the topic of conversation there as anything.
And to that, we do have the contractors, to the extent that they can, they do find like a secondhand sale on the turf where so for us, the fall, we have to do the GMAX testing, which is basically, we don't want folks to get hurt when they're playing, but there may be other uses that maybe it's an outdoor play equipment, or maybe that's not a good example, but sorry? Batting cages. So they do try and resell the turf.
Can I have a follow-up question? What kind of feedback you get from the public, synthetic versus natural? Do you get any feedback, positive or negative?
From the community?
Yeah.
So from the folks who play, they want it for the most part. Cricket was an exception. They like to play on natural grass, but for the most part, it's really hard because the practices or games are not predictable on grass, and the playing season is so short in the Pacific Northwest. So the folks who use it to play love it. For people who have read these articles about rubber infill, they will express some concern over that. And then finally, it's usually the neighbors, the immediate neighbors, because what happens when you put in synthetic turf, the return on investment is worth it if you put lights. And so when you have lights and synthetic turf, then you're playing for longer hours, and so you'd sometimes hear from the immediate neighbors.
Thank you.
Let me just say, as a former Little League coach and dad, I love the turf because we could count on it for practice. And I remember playing in the snow, playing a baseball game in the snow at Skyline on the turf. That wouldn't have happened at Inglewood on the grass. So, yeah, we loved it. Anything else from anyone? Go ahead, Mike.
I just wanted to see if anybody was sliding into home on this. Actually, I do have a...
Mostly they were shivering, but it was still fun.
I just want to build on the comment that Chair Bachman made earlier around the dollars set aside for acquisition. And I've read through this, and I missed that fact about the funding because I'd seen, and in my mind, there are parts in the goal number 3 that talk about proactively seeking parkland and land for connections. So just to reinforce, there's a sort of a hard to see exactly what it is. And so if there is money that's needed to create connections or other parks, that should be really clear. So just want to reemphasize with Mark. And then one or two other quick comments. One is about, and we talked a little bit about this in one of the breakouts during that workshop, about that the parks are really an amazing asset, but you go to the park and almost always leave. So if I take my grandkids to Big Rock and we go climbing around, then we're finished and we go. Or if I'm running in Soaring Eagle, I'm done, I go. Places that I've been that it's like, oh, there's some amenity close by the park. And you go to the park and you hang out, go to a coffee shop or whatever. And I'm not necessarily suggesting that that belongs in the pros plan, but there may be a link to the economic development plan to better utilize these resources for the economic sustainability in the city. And one just flyer, there's a picture on page 111 of folks working on a trail. And I know several of those folks. One of the individuals is 94 years old, which says something about being in parks and health, I think. It's just pretty amazing individual who could be doing that at 94. So it's just a random picture that you picked, I'm sure, but it's actually kind of a neat picture. So anyways, if you could talk about snow and baseball, I could toss that one in.
Good job. All right. Anything else?
Oh, I actually just want to say that thank you for all your comments. It's really helpful. You know, we've looked at the document a long time, and it's really important to get this feedback. So we truly appreciate it.
I guess one question is if people have additional thoughts up until whatever the 21st, I think was the date, go through Evan or?
Sure. I think that'll be a good way, and
we'll just
Evan
do emails
will
through
forward
Evan.
that to us.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Great discussion. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Let's move on to agenda-related public comment for the evening. So if anybody has comments about the discussion on the pros plan, now is the time. And 7 minutes per person. So do we have anyone online?
And we have one hand raised. Mr. Stickney, I'll promote you to panelist.
Hello, planning commissioners. Paul Stickney, Sammamish. Just a couple comments tonight on the pros plan. I think this is the fourth one the city's done. They get better and better. I echo many comments that I won't repeat, that virtually all of you got involved tonight and had some excellent input on this plan. It is data rich. Glad you went into the financing. I've got a couple things there to chat about. Appreciate Chair Boffman and other comments about sort of the land acquisition and the neighborhood parks, and I'm going to paraphrase and focusing on the math and what needs really are, and at the same time what survey results say. There's the sort of bottom-up important factual side and the top-down feeling side. Agree with all that. A couple things I caught is in checking out the plan as all of you were talking, I only picked up on a couple things I didn't see before either. It looks like in Figure 13, the 5-year capital spending for Sammamish was roughly $45 million, and I believe that's 5 years past. It might be 5 years going forward, but I don't think so. I think it's 5 years past. And our peer jurisdictions were in the neighborhood of 10 to 16 million. And that goes and testifies to the, priority Sammamish has had on the parks and how much the change has been since the city incorporated and moving forward. Going the next 6 years, I won't repeat what was said by others tonight, but I will reference one point and then launch into a topic that I maybe misheard it. If somebody talked about it, excuse me, but I didn't hear it. It was discussed by staff that at the end of the 2029 period, the roughly 43 million that is being spent on parks is funded, and that's just excellent. Transportation would probably wish it had that much to spend. But then the money is kind of less certain and not the same levels of past funding. And I did notice that 7 to 10 year priorities that are not funded yet is at least feels like an awfully big number. It's in this plan, it's about 77 million. Maybe that's maybe some things that may or may not get funded, may or may not stay priorities, but that's a big chunk of change. And I'll circle back to because it affects parks, it affects transportation, and it affects everything. And I won't go on a long statement on this, just keep it really brief. If you go to the Fiscal Sustainability Task Force page and read the public comments on the 27th of July and August 10th, take a look at a plan that can meet about half of the lowest side of what our community needs for housing, can generate over $20 million a year in net revenue for the budget, over and above what's there. On the park side of things, generate over $35 million in one-time fees, plus increased REIT of nearly $2 million a year, and a whole lot more. There's a plan in play for holistic enrichments that are net positive and low impact, and that's all I'll say. So anyway, good job on the parks tonight. They really are a tremendous community asset, and staff, consultants, the commissioners, good job, and appreciate the opportunity to chime in a bit. Have a good evening.
Anyone else?
And we have no more hands raised.
All right. Thanks, Paul. Anything else from staff for the good of the order?
I would just like to offer a programming note for the month of December. Our second meeting in December falls on December 21st, and it's very close to the holidays and also overlaps when school's getting out. So we're going to move the presentation that's scheduled for December 21st into the first meeting in January, which I believe is January 4th, and we'll be canceling that meeting. So our meeting will be December 7th, where we'll do the public hearing for the pros plan, and then meet again in January. So
Thanks. Appreciate that. Would somebody like to adjourn, move to adjourn?
Second.
Been moved and seconded that we adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Everyone have themselves a super happy turkey Thanksgiving. Thanks, everyone. Have a nice evening.